went to Nikita Khrushchev, the ranking member of Stalin's military council, hoping he could change Stalin's mind. Nikita later told his son about the exchange.
His tears is going on his face, and he told, Comrade Khrushchev, you have to understand what's happening. If we'll not pull our troops out, we would lose everything. And then my father told, I called Stalin, and Stalin was in his country house, sitting with his close associate. Comrade Stalin told my father, don't pour your nose in the military affairs, you understand nothing. And he hung his telephone. And next day, Germans start this offensive on the both sides, and they circle 500,000 of the soldiers, and they lost everything.
To the south, Stalin's offensive on the Crimea Peninsula also ended in disaster. The Red Army attack was no match for Nazi General Erich von Manstein. Von Manstein was a hero in Germany for his work in the West. He was the commander of the 11th Army, which had steamrolled across France in a matter of weeks. He had little trouble repelling the Russian attack.
The impact of these defeats was catastrophic for the Soviets, because it meant that on the eve of German Operation Blau, the German summer campaign, the Red Army was deprived of something like 500,000 of its troops defending in southern Russia. They had no troops to plug those holes.
On the morning of June 28, 1942, Operation Blue began. German Army Groups A and B attacked with a staggered offensive. First to strike was Group B, which included Paulus's 6th Army. Then came Group A, heading to the all-important oil fields in the Caucasus. The staggered attack meant the German Air Force could provide deadly air cover to one army group and then the other. The Nazis quickly opened up a 200-mile gash in the Red Army line. For the German soldiers pressing forward, it was almost too easy.
You saw infantry to the right and to the left, so it is the feeling you are not alone in an unknown country, and even being attacked, there is help to the right as well as to the left of you.
We marched on. For a long time we were only marching, and our horses got exhausted. Then we used Russian tractors or tanks we had taken. We were like a group of gypsies moving eastwards.
The lead up to Operation Blue has been well documented. But how the ensuing battle actually played out is not as well known. It is here that the newly uncovered records are overturning accepted wisdom.
What's unique about the Battle of Stalingrad in terms of source materials today is that we now have ground truth on the battle. I mean the records of those armies and soldiers who participated in the fighting. For example, in the case of the German records, we now have daily records of German 6th Army, which had been lost for over 50 years.
Many of the 6th Army documents have only recently been located. And on the Soviet side, all but the most heavily censored accounts were hidden from Western historians until the USSR dissolved.
And whatever books were published were generally politically oriented books published to proclaim the glories of the Red Army's victories, to explain their defeats, but insofar as possible cover up the blemishes and warts on that military record.
For years, crucial documents were stuck behind the Iron Curtain. But in 2000, 9 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were finally released.
If you examine these records that weren't available to previous historians, you can identify certain misconceptions that pertain to how and why the battle was conducted and the outcome of the battle overall. We can now take these misconceptions and convert them into truths.
The most popular of these misconceptions deals with Stalin's strategy as the Nazis advanced. History tells us that Stalin ordered his men to fall back, luring the Germans into a trap within the confines of the city. The plan looks like military genius, a great achievement that has made its way into Soviet lore. But David Glantz has discovered that this popular story is false.
There are two fundamental myths that have been destroyed by the new archival releases. First is that Stalin deliberately, once the Germans began Operation Blau, ordered his troops in southern Russia to withdraw.
In fact, the archives reveal Stalin gave strict orders for his men to hold their positions at all costs.
This volume of Stavka Orders and Directives contains orders from the Stavka regarding Stalin's desire that his army stand fast and fight. I quote from a 9 July order, "There can be no sort of withdrawal."
Stalin believed that under no circumstances should his men fall back. And if they were driven back, they were ordered to execute a fighting withdrawal, battling tooth and nail for every inch of ground they gave up. But no matter how adamant Stalin's orders, the Red Army was no match for the overpowering Nazi advance.
The armies that conducted those stand-fast operations and fighting withdrawals were largely destroyed by the German juggernaut as it advanced across southern Russia.
Red Army commander Anatoly Mereshko, who was moving westward with his cadet company, witnessed the Soviet front collapsing around him. Mereshko saw men retreating to stay alive, not an organized effort to draw Hitler's army into a trap.
We went to the crossroads of the fields, and there we met groups of people who were running away from Kharkov, dragging along hopeless soldiers from the Red Army. They were all so depressed and hopeless that they sometimes gave us their weapons.
Mereshko and his company did their best to slow the Germans and conduct fighting withdrawals. But each day they would lose miles to the ferocious Nazi onslaught. Around them, the Russian soil ran red with the blood of their countrymen.
Often we retreated leaving the dead unburied. We just left them on the ground seized by the Germans. The hardest thing was to look into the eyes of the old people, women and children, who asked us why we were leaving them. You understand how hard it was to listen to these pleas. The tears appeared in the eyes, but we really could not stop the Germans.
The emboldened Axis forces pushed forward, using both guns and psychological warfare to break the spirit of the Soviet soldiers.
The Germans were dropping leaflets with the following inscription: "Stalin's little devils, fight against your commanders, surrender or else you will be destroyed." And on one of those days, the distance between our positions was 300 meters. The Germans announced from the speakerphone, "Look what will happen with you if you do not surrender." We saw how they took out 5 half-naked people at the fortifications and shot them down.
The Nazi methods were working. Despite Stalin's orders to stand and fight, or at least battle and retreat, the Red Army was in disarray. Men on the run, just trying to survive. Stalin was livid when he heard the news from the front.
When they saw this magnitude of this defeat, when it was all these Germans rolled through there and there was no possibility to stop anybody, Stalin called Khrushchev to my father. He told, "Come here to Moscow."
As the ranking member of Stalin's military council, Khrushchev knew he would bear the brunt of Stalin's ire.
Khrushchev, my father, came to Stalin's dacha. Stalin asked him, "Comrade Khrushchev, do you remember what's happened with the Russian Imperial Army general when he lost the battle East Prussia in 1914? And my father told me, yes, I remember it was the General Samsonov and he committed suicide. And then Stalin answered, please eat your soup, and answered nothing. But my father didn't want to commit suicide. Really, he thought it was not his fault, it was Stalin's fault.
Today's military strategists agree. Most believe that if Stalin had ordered an organized retreat and given his men time to regroup, they could have re-established their defenses and avoided much of the slaughter that took place. But the iron-fisted Stalin refused to back down. In fact, recently discovered archives show just how far he was willing to go to stifle the Nazi offensive. In Stalin's eyes, resistance was the highest priority. His troops had to keep fighting. On July 28, 1942, Stalin resorted to draconian measures. Order 227, issued by the Commissary of Defense, proclaimed, "Not one step back." Stalin would not let his forces retreat. To enforce 227, he ordered each army to create blocking detachments, with instructions to shoot panicked soldiers who were abandoning the front. Mereshko hoped the blocking detachments and new arrivals like his cadets would stem the tide of fleeing men.
We thought that we would stop the retreat. In the end, though, the orders set up the barrier, but the retreats continued. But we needed to stop the panic, which almost all the divisions were overwhelmed with, especially those who took part in Kharkov's operation. They were frightened not only by the infantry, tanks, and aviation, but even just the word Germans made them run away.
The blocking detachments were placed under the command of the NKVD, the Soviet police forces. One report reveals that they detained more than 600,000 troops, arrested more than 25,000, and shot as many as 10,000 of their own countrymen. Ironically, the NKVD did a better job of pulling Soviet soldiers out of circulation than the Germans. The initial success of Operation Blue had left the Nazis unprepared for the vast numbers of captured men. Hitler had enough troops and firepower to defeat the Red Army, but not enough to round up prisoners and transport them away from the front.
Although the Germans destroyed the neighborhood of 6 Soviet armies and encircled many of those forces, they simply did not have the infantry strength to police up to capture those individuals that they encircled.
Many potential prisoners escaped. Those who didn't were kept in outdoor cages, where freezing conditions and lack of food meant almost certain death. But for the Nazis, prisoners were a minor concern. Operation Blue was proceeding as planned, and what was left of Stalin's Red Army was being pushed steadily eastward. By early July, a jubilant Adolf Hitler proclaimed, "The Russian is finished." Anticipating the impending collapse of the Soviet Union, Hitler modified Operation Blue. First, he ordered the 6th Army to seize Stalin's namesake, the city of Stalingrad. The rest of Army Group B was split off to take the Caucasus, while a major portion of Army Group A was sent north to attack Leningrad. Hitler's confidence was premature. He was proclaiming victory before the battles had been won. He was spreading his forces too thin, pulling much-needed mechanized support away from his infantry. The 6th Army was hardest hit. As the men prepared for their assault on Stalingrad, the 4th Panzer, their supporting tank army, headed to the Caucasus. This left the 6th Army vulnerable as it moved towards the city.